Hello and welcome to the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty's webinar on finding solutions to homeless encampments. We're very excited to have you all with us today and to have on the line some excellent presenters who can help us all find solutions to the homeless encampments we see in our communities for the good of the homeless people living there and for the good of the community at large. Today on our webinar, we have muted all of the attendees who are listening. So if you want to ask a question, there's a question box on the side panel on your control panel that should be appearing on the right side of your screen. You can type a question into that box and we will try to address them either as we're going along or at the end of the webinar. The webinar will also hopefully be recorded and available after a few days. And if you have people who you think should be able to see it, we will be sending the link out to the recorded version, as well as making available the PowerPoint slides, and we'll get that information out to people a few days after the webinar happens. Today on the webinar, we have a great number of really fantastic experts on these issues. I'm a senior attorney, Eric Tars, here at the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, and myself and my colleague, Tristia Bauman, will lead off with some of the kind of national overview and best practices. Then we'll have Sam Dodge from the San Francisco Mayor's Office on Housing and Opportunity speak to us about some of the practices they're putting into place in San Francisco. And then three speakers from the city of Syracuse, Paul Driscoll with their Department of Neighborhood and Business Development, Lieutenant Richard Schaaf from the Community Policing Division in Syracuse, and Melissa Marone, who coordinates the Syracuse's coalition of housing and homelessness groups. So each of those should provide some really excellent background and perspectives on how they are constructively addressing encampments in their communities. Just to start off, I'm going to do a couple quick poll questions to see who we are and how and get a little information about who the folks are who are on the call today. Great, so it looks like we've got a large percentage of folks from city and county government, a good number of advocates, and some service providers and other government people as well. So here's the results. Definitely a plurality of city and government, county government, as well as other government people. So we will definitely try to gear our remarks in that direction, but accessible for everybody. All right, next question is, what's your level of knowledge of the criminalization of homelessness and constructive alternatives? Excellent. So we've got lots of people who are have some knowledge, and we are hoping to learn more today. So we will go ahead and move along with that. All right. So today we're going to talk about homeless encampments across the country. We did a survey a few years ago of media reports of homeless encampments and found them in 46 states, including DC, over 100 encampments. And since the time of that report, we have confirmed them in the other few states. So we can now confirm that homeless encampments do exist or have existed in that time period in every state in the country. This is a national problem. In that time, only 8 of those encampments had a legal status to them. This is a number that's increased as more and more communities consider making homeless encampments somewhat more of a regular feature of their methods for dealing with homelessness in their communities. But still, by far the minority of encampments have any sort of legal status. The majority of the encampments that we discovered through our media survey were evicted, and in fact, many of the media stories were coverage of the evictions of those encampments. So while they did exist, they in many cases no longer do, but may have moved to other areas in the city. And the different approaches that these encampments or different ways that they've manifested themselves really ranged from those that are very self-organized and self-sustaining to those that are more ad hoc and dangerous. So you do see a full range of the ways that homeless people are trying to simply survive in public spaces. And in response to that, we've seen a number of non-constructive responses from communities. Here you can see a picture with a number of police officers and a number of sanitation workers cleaning out an encampment. Again, this is when there isn't an alternative place for people to go to, simply sweeping an encampment out like this can be very expensive. All of the police officers' time there, all of the sanitation workers' time there. In Hawaii, in Honolulu, researchers have found that it's spending $15,000 a week to sweep away the camps. And if you note the second highlighted sentence here, a week after the sweep, they rebuilt their encampment not far from the spot where it had just been swept from. So if you aren't providing an alternative place for people to go, you're simply spending money to move people around without really providing an answer to the overall problem of the lack of places for people to be. And people do need a place to sleep. They need a place to exist safely and securely. And they are going to create those again and again and again if they are taken away from them. So spending money on simply sweeping people out of public view isn't a constructive approach, and in fact only puts further barriers between people and getting out of homelessness, because it can destroy the possessions they have. It can give them a criminal record, which makes it more difficult to get employment or to get housing. It can destroy necessary documents that people might have that might be helpful to them in getting employment or getting housing. So really, sweeping without providing any adequate alternative is just simply not an approach that's going to make things better for anybody. And it's a use of the community's resources in a way that isn't constructive. This has led the federal government to take a number of steps over the past few years to really start pushing local communities to look at alternative ways of addressing homelessness. And they come at them with constitutional, policy, policing, and funding concerns. The Department of Justice, as many people may know, filed a brief in our case in Boise against their anti-camping ordinance a few months ago, stating that it should be uncontroversial that punishing conduct that is a universal and unavoidable consequence of being human violates the 8th Amendment. Sleeping is a life-sustaining activity. It must occur at some time in some place. If that person has nowhere else to go, then enforcement of an anti-camping ordinance against that person criminalizes her for being homeless. And That brief has led, is focusing on the Eighth Amendment. There are a number of other constitutional concerns that have been raised by advocates in cases against homeless sweeps, including the rights to be free from unreasonable seizures or deprived of liberty or property without due process of law, free exercise of religion as well, and fair housing concerns, particularly where sweeps are affecting people disparately on the basis of race or disability. As a result of the Department of Justice's filing in our case last year, the International Municipal Lawyers Association at the National League of Cities conference earlier this month made a recommendation that communities look at their anti-camping ordinances and anti-sleeping, anti-sitting ordinances and take the Department of Justice's concerns into account. And one city that has done this in response to the federal brief filing is Lenore, North Carolina, and they modified their anti-camping ordinance to include exceptions when there's an inadequate number of shelter beds in the community or restrictions on beds that disqualify persons from using them due to no fault of their own, such as disability access or exceeding maximum stay requirements. So this again is the recommendation from the International Municipal Lawyers Association, which was advising at the National League of Cities conference earlier this month. We are happy to work with communities. The best practice, we believe, is simply to get these laws off the books altogether, but there may be ways of modifying them to meet these constitutional concerns. But we really encourage getting them off the books altogether because of the policy concerns. And again, this comes from the Department of Justice's brief, but sharing the federal government's perspective that enforcing these ordinances in general is just poor public policy. It does nothing to break the cycle of poverty or prevent homelessness in the future, and only imposes further burdens on scarce judicial and correctional resources and have long-lasting and devastating effects on individuals' lives. So really, whether it's the specific constitutional concerns or the general policy concerns, there's having a criminalizing approach to homelessness is not something that's constructive. And in fact, it's more cost-effective for communities to simply provide housing. A study done of Charlotte, North Carolina's Housing First program, where they provided several hundred units of housing to chronically homeless people in the community, found the community saved $1.8 million in its first year alone by reducing the time that homeless people spent in emergency rooms, admitted to hospitals, or spent in jail. And so these are very real numbers, a 78% drop in arrests and 84% fewer days spent in jail. So these are savings that can accrue to the community immediately once adequate housing is provided. In addition to these concerns, the Department of Justice Community-Oriented Policing Services Division, or COPS Division, dedicated their December newsletter to issues of criminalization of homelessness and really emphasized that law enforcement can and should play a positive role in their communities, trying to get policy support for other ways of addressing homelessness than by putting police on the front lines of dealing with a social service problem. So there's a great number of resources there. Finally, on the funding front, the federal government is working to use the power of its purse. This year's application program for the communities of care granted up to 2 points to continuums of care that could demonstrate they were implementing strategies that prevent criminalization of homelessness. And as Deputy Secretary Annaleva said, competition for HUD funding is very fierce, so even half a point can make a difference. This was up to 2 points for communities that they can demonstrate they're taking a positive approach in this regard. So not only can communities lose money by simply not using it effectively, they could also potentially lose federal funding dollars if they aren't starting to take a more positive approach. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tristia to talk a little bit more about one of the other great and very specific resources from the federal government on dealing with homeless encampments, and then a couple of other best practices and resources from across the country. Tristia?
Thank you, Eric. Hello, my name is Tristia Bauman. I'm also a senior attorney at the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. I want to start by underscoring what Eric just presented to you. And Eric, if you could go to the previous slide, please. The federal government has taken a very strong stance against the criminalization of homelessness. That is evident in its willingness to use its power through the Department of Justice to weigh in on litigation challenging criminalization practices. It is evident in its use of funding streams to influence policy at the local level. And it's also evident in its issuance of guidance to communities on how it believes the issues of homelessness can best be addressed within a community. Now, one important thing to note about these guidance materials is that they are based on best practices. They are data-informed approaches that have been proven to work in communities across the country. And one of the guidance that I'd like to talk about now is one released by the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. The United States Interagency Council on Homelessness is the federal body charged with coordinating the federal government's response to homelessness, and it includes the heads of 19 different federal agencies, and it is guided by the federal strategic plan to end homelessness that was put into place in 2010. As part of its effort, it released a document entitled Ending Homelessness for People Living in Encampments, and that was recently released in August of 2015. In that document, the federal government recognized, as Eric said, that encampments are a national homeless crisis, and they're a symptom of broken systems that can be improved to increase efficiency, eliminate unnecessary gaps, improve unnecessary barriers to housing, and reduce the burden of homelessness for the entire community, certainly for homeless individuals, but also for systems that are disproportionately burdened by homeless individuals, such as the emergency healthcare systems or the criminal justice systems, and to do all of those things to the benefit of the bottom line, city and local budgets. So the guidance on encampments includes several different strategies that are ultimately designed to link homeless people to permanent housing, and I want to discuss just a few of those strategies today. Eric, next slide. So one of the most important considerations when determining how to address an encampment is to adequately prepare and plan for how people within an encampment can be connected with permanent housing. As Eric mentioned previously, simply closing one encampment will not reduce the total number of homeless campers in your community. In fact, all it may do is move someone from one location to another. If a community wishes to end encampments within its community, then it must employ those strategies that end homelessness. And what we know ends homelessness is housing. To ensure that an encampment can be eliminated sustainably, it's important to ensure adequate time for planning and implementation. And the federal government identifies 4 key elements for addressing the planning stage. One is to develop a strategy that has shared goals across a broad group of stakeholders, and also shared outcomes. What is it that the cleanup will produce, and how will it connect people ultimately to housing opportunities? Also, collaboration is very key to preparation and planning. I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by collaboration, but ultimately it is important to engage stakeholders across the spectrum, both public and private, with differing levels of expertise and interactions with homeless people in the housing market, so that people can gain access to opportunities that may never be readily available to them if they have to navigate the system on their own. Also, outreach and engagement is key. It's key not only for building relationships with those homeless persons who have historically been difficult to serve or who have not been able to, usually by virtue of mental health or substance abuse issues, to access the existing crisis or housing infrastructure, but also important so that individual plans can be tailored, which can improve the efficiency of service delivery. And then finally, identification of housing options so that a community has a sense of what the appropriate size is to meet the need, and also what type of housing is necessary in order to provide an alternative to a homeless encampment for homeless campers. A great idea and something that can help to produce the data-informed strategy for your community is to the full extent possible track your activities through the Homeless Management Information System. And another important thing to note just about the preparation and planning stage is that it should not be unnecessarily rushed. Certainly, homeless encampments should be treated as emergencies. They are emergencies, certainly for the homeless campers and also for the communities. But unnecessary rushing of the process can not only waste resources, but it'll also prove ineffective and can just lead to new encampments. Next slide, please. So talking a little bit more about some of the key strategies that I've just identified. The first is intensive and persistent outreach. The outreach workers should be ones that have experience in engaging vulnerable and unsheltered people. There is a skill, there is a technique that is specific to that type of outreach, and it is important in order to be effective that the outreach workers be ones who are adequately trained to and experienced to accomplish the task before them. It's also important that outreach teams not include just what we might call the usual suspects. We want a broad, and we want it because it's more effective, a broad cross-disciplinary set of people who are engaged in outreach teams to reach the people in the areas where they are on the streets and in homeless encampments. That, of course, includes your traditional outreach workers, but it also includes law enforcement. It includes public health and behavioral health workers. It includes city and county staff that can connect people to benefits, and many others. I just listed a few here. When engaged in outreach, it is important to gather critical data. And this data is critical for not only crafting a plan to address homelessness on an individual level, but also to determine what the system that you're building in the team needs to look like, what sort of supports it needs to include, and what size it must be in order to solve the problem of homeless encampment. So some of the critical data. First is to create a by-name list. And I'll just say as an aside that while these things have been listed in the guidance on encampments and certainly are best practices, we've also seen these outreach and engagement systems be used in the national efforts to end veteran homelessness, where we have seen tremendous success and a number of communities declare for the first time ever functional zero, that there are no homeless veterans who cannot be paired with housing support, and the system that exists in those communities using these types of strategies has led to a situation where veteran homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And what we want to do is expand the lessons that we've learned in the veteran homelessness context and apply it more broadly to other subpopulations that can similarly benefit. And the guidance recognizes this. So returning to the critical data, a by name list. You want to know who the homeless people are, identify them by name, and determine what their individual needs are, what their individual barriers are to securing permanent housing. They will not all be the same. In some encampments, you may find that people have been chronically homeless for years. You may also find that people are first-time homeless. They have never experienced it before. They're perfectly capable of supporting themselves if they can be paired quickly with housing support. So you don't want a one-size-fits-all response because you're not dealing with a one-size homogeneous population. You also want to get demographic data and have a sense of the community that you're working with. Are there certain disabilities that are presenting in the homeless encampment that may be best addressed using strategies specific to those mental health or physical health conditions? Are there other demographic data points that could be helpful in expanding access to additional resources? Like, for example, are there a number of veterans that are in the encampment that could then be paired with new resources designed to end veteran homelessness? Having that data is critical. Also, of course, you want to know the number of people living at the site so you can right-size the system and develop a system that will allow for housing supports necessary to meet the need of the entire community. And of course, I'm speaking ultimately of permanent housing support, but also identifying what the interim crisis intervention housing supports can be that can be made immediately available to move people from public spaces and into sheltered alternatives. Another important aspect of outreach is to maintain a consistent presence in the encampment. It is really important to build trust, particularly with a population of people that has great reason to distrust government because so many of their interactions with government have been negative. It's important to build the trust so that when resources are provided to them, they will make use of those resources, whether that be available mental health treatment or even an apartment that may be available to them with no barriers. It also allows for effective communication. It can improve collaboration between providers, but also make sure that the population affected is getting the most updated, current, and accurate information when you have a presence. And you want to have multiple opportunities to connect with outreach workers, particularly for people who may be suffering from mental health problems and are not always able to make best use of a one-time opportunity. And of course, the goal of outreach should be to refer individuals directly to permanent housing or interim housing solutions that are immediately available to them. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, collaboration across sectors and systems is important. I'll go quickly over this, but public and private partnerships and deep engagement are critical. One of the things that we found to be absolutely necessary in the effort, in any successful effort to end veteran homelessness, is the engagement of elected officials. It is important, and I say this, and I really can't overemphasize this statement. In any community that wishes to address homelessness adequately and sustainably, you need the engagement of the elected officials. That is the body that is most able to coordinate the resources and employ the power to achieve solutions, especially solutions on a timely basis. Engagement of elected officials really cannot be overstated. Planning, Parks and Rec, and Public Works departments obviously are very important to the process as well, as they will be engaged in a lot of the cleanups and returning the area that is currently a homeless encampment back to the use for which it was originally intended. You, of course, want other service providers and people with expertise spanning the gamut from mental health, behavioral health, physical health, and other types of experts who can work with the population. You also want to engage landlords. One of the things that's often overlooked are barriers to housing. While affordable housing certainly is at the center of the homeless crisis, access to housing that may be affordable to people is also a critical and barrier to be overcome. For example, poor credit histories, evictions on one's record, or criminal histories can prevent someone from being able to rent housing in the private market, even where they can afford it. And landlord engagement, so that barriers can be relaxed for people who would prove to be good renters if they were given the opportunity, is also a really important part of improvement in the system. And also engaging philanthropy, who can play a really important role in providing gap funding where government resources cannot be helpful. And finally, you want to really look at leadership within the camp and some of the trusted intermediaries. One of the most efficient ways to engage the campers, particularly in large encampments, is to look at the natural leaders that have emerged and that the other campers look to for guidance. Engaging them will be a very useful method for securing a coordinated response to homelessness by the campers themselves. You want to, of course, have broad collaboration because broad-based support is critical. You want to have good communication networks across the various sectors. And the outcomes of this type of effective collaboration should be focused on maximizing the efficiency of pairing people with existing resources and making sure that the right people are prioritized for the correct resources. You want to align resources so that system inefficiencies are eliminated and efforts are not being duplicated. Also, you want to address systemic gaps, figure out which subpopulations may not be served in the current system and where you can make improvements in that way. Next slide, please. And of course, all of this should be designed with the goal ultimately of providing a low barrier path to permanent housing for homeless people. And you would want to use a housing first strategy. The federal government has been encouraging a housing first strategy now for the past decade. It is a proven strategy that works. What I mean by housing first, I'm referring to a philosophy that eliminates unnecessary barriers to accessing housing rather than having to prove housing readiness by securing an income or complying with certain mental health or substance abuse treatment requirements. Housing is recognized as fundamental to stability and is provided first. Housing first, however, is not housing only. So once housing is provided for those people who need it, they should be paired with supportive services as needed. But you want to tailor your housing strategies to the needs of individuals. For example, chronically homeless people who suffer from mental health conditions may need, and in fact probably do need, permanent supportive housing. That is housing that has access either on-site or that are delivered off-site but coordinated with the housing provider to pair that individual with any necessary treatment, whether that be anything from job training to other types of case management, mental health, substance abuse treatment. But for a single mother who's fleeing from domestic violence and has two children that need to be in school and she simply needs a place where she can afford, permanent supportive housing may not be necessary for her. Instead, there may be other housing supports, like, for example, Section 8 vouchers. Helping people navigate the existing supports within a community, working with the local public housing authority, can also be a really important step for removing someone who might otherwise be on the street and putting them into a housing resource that is already available to them, if they know how to access it. And of course, landlord engagement is important for reducing the barriers to private market housing, which is of course an important part of the solution to ending homelessness as well. And of course, we want to align these activities with the existing crisis response system. Certainly, permanent housing is something that does not exist in adequate supply currently, and in order to right-size the system of permanent housing, there is a significant, although well invested, amount of money that would need to be invested up front, and there's some time before the system can be adequately developed. You need interim solutions. And so a crisis response system that also does not provide unnecessary barriers like sobriety and other things that will keep people on the street should be coordinated with the larger efforts to pair people with more permanent housing. And also, you want to be mindful that the system should not function to have presence in encampments serve as a de facto precondition to receiving available resources. Otherwise, you may create unwittingly a perverse incentive for encampments to be established in a community. Certainly, it is a way to access people, and it is important to reduce the number of homeless campers within a given community, but there are people who are not in encampments who also will need access to those resources, and any wise and well-built system will account for those populations as well. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that, aside from just money resources, that communities can increase access to affordable housing and increase the affordable housing stock within its community is to better utilize vacant property that exists within its geography. One way to do that, and I'm going to go very quickly over these examples because we have more information about them, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in anything that I describe on this slide to reach out to the Law Center for more information. But first is Title V of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. Under Title V, the state, local governments as well as nonprofit entities are eligible to receive unused federal properties free of charge. And when I say free of charge, I mean title to those properties can be transferred to eligible homeless service providers, which include those entities that I mentioned, with no cost. There may be costs associated with rehabilitating the property so that it is useful for your purposes, and that is something that would have to be borne by the applicant. But how that is done is really up to you, and there's also a wide range of activities that the surplus property can be used for. Currently, each year, over 2 million people are served by programming operating in properties that were formerly owned by the federal government but were conveyed under the Title V program. Any person who's listening who's part of a local continuum of care, who's part of a local government, can make use of this program not only to provide homeless services and to provide temporary housing like crisis shelters, but it also can be used to provide permanent supportive housing stock. And I would love to talk with people about how to access those properties. I'll only say now that each Friday, properties that are available are listed by geography in the Federal Register in a HUD notice. And if you'd like more information about how to access those and how to apply for those properties, please let us know. You can also make use of property that is not government owned. And one example of that is the state statute, Illinois Abandoned Housing Rehabilitation Act. Under that state law, nonprofit organizations are able to take temporary possession of abandoned housing. They can rehabilitate that property, and if within 2 years the owner of the property recoups the property, then they must recompensate the nonprofit organization for fixing up the property. And this was originally designed to address the blight that resulted from the foreclosure crisis. If, however, after that 2-year period, the owner does not reclaim the property, then the nonprofit entity can obtain a judicial deed to that property and use it as their own to provide affordable housing. And there's a 10-year mandatory period that housing must be provided on an affordable basis to the community. And what this law has been used for in at least pockets of Illinois is to create housing for a community land trust, which provides affordable housing in perpetuity. And so there are a lot of really creative ways that vacant space can be used. And our next speaker will talk about how a surplus school building has been used to create the Navigation Center in San Francisco, which is a really exciting model. And I would turn it over now to Sam Dodge of the San Francisco Mayor's Office to describe his work on the Navigation Center. Thank you.
Thanks, Tristia. Just a reminder to folks, if you have any questions during the presentations, you can type them into the questions chat bar on the side of your screen, and we will try and answer them at the end of the program. Sam, are you there? Sam, if you're speaking, we can't hear you yet. Sam, we still can't hear you. I see you unmuted yourself. Let's see here. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. We'll try and fix it as soon as we can. All right. Let's see here. Paul, are you guys on the line?
We are. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. So why don't we skip ahead to Paul and the folks from Syracuse while we try to resolve our issues with Sam's presentation.
Sure. So, yes, my name is Paul.
Sorry, to introduce Paul in the city of Syracuse. As Tristia mentioned, there are some communities that have successfully ended veterans homelessness, and Syracuse is among those. And so we're very excited to have them on the panel today to share some of the strategies that have been involved in that success and in trying to move beyond that initial success to addressing homelessness more broadly. So with that, Paul and partners.
Yes, thank you very much. I run what's called the Neighborhood and Business Development Office for the city of Syracuse. It's kind of like the community development office that administers the federal block grants. But we're very closely tied with the local continuum of care group, who we have the head of that here, Melissa Marone, and also Sergeant Rich Shaw from our community policing division of the Syracuse Police Department. And yes, as you mentioned, Eric, we did recently obtain that designation of functional zero in regards to veteran homelessness in this community. Very proud of that, but we're also always caveat that, you know, designation with this fact, with the explanation that it doesn't mean that there aren't any veterans that are lacking permanent housing. It's just that we have, you know, a plan in place that should a veteran become homeless within 45 days, we have a system set up that find permanent housing for that person or individual as the definition of functional zero. So we're always careful to mention that piece when we get some platitudes about ending veteran homelessness. But I guess really what we wanted to talk about is the unsheltered homeless and the encampments that has been the discussion of this presentation thus far. And it might, you know, just really briefly help folks to understand Syracuse and our context. You know, we're a city of about 150,000 people. We're in the geographic center of a metropolitan statistical area of about 600,000 people. And we are, you know, the Syracuse by nature, by its being the major city in that MSA, is kind of the focal point for homeless shelter service providers. So on any given night, I mean, we have about 400 shelter beds occupied. We're very proud of our shelter system, and because we do have a housing first and a rapid rehousing component that is very successfully finds permanent housing for the vast majority of those who find themselves at one of these shelter beds. So we do have a really good system in place. Someone might argue good because it's people might say, oh, go to Syracuse if you want to receive good treatment in terms of homeless provision. But then separate from that is the unsheltered homeless issue. And that relates to the encampment issue and what to do about that. And to give you a sense of scale on that, in the middle, Syracuse is a very cold climate, in the winter, but in the summer, we have anywhere between between 25 and 30 unsheltered homeless, the folks that don't want to avail themselves of shelters and then set up in camps throughout the city. And really, the mayor here, Stephanie Miner, has taken her lead from the police department in terms of how to deal with that. It's more of a constructive engagement policy with these unsheltered homeless folks. And again, this comes from experience in the past where the city has been more heavy-handed in terms of dismantling these encampments, and really, we're talking years ago, found that to be counterproductive. They would either, pop up elsewhere, as was mentioned earlier in this presentation, or worse, drive the unsheltered homeless away from the public right-of-way and away from the eyes of outreach workers, and who generally, monitor the health and well-being of the unsheltered throughout the year. So again, I think it's important to recognize that our current policy is really a function of, came from a policy of our police department in terms of this is not a productive way to deal with this population in terms of dismantling, and rather engaging them through a street outreach network, but also a law enforcement engagement to say, hey, we recognize that you're camping here, but there's also a duty to kind of keep things in check to some degree, and not allow, the encampments to infringe on, the regular business of the city and whatnot. So, I think that's an important piece to notify, to talk to people about. It's good law enforcement practice for this constructive engagement. And hopefully Rich can talk to some, to his experience, because he's personally dealing with the folks under bridges and on highway medians and whatnot. But Melissa here is the head of our continuum of care coalition here locally, and that's kind of the flip side of the coin, or the other piece of this is strengthening. She has really strengthened this coalition of housing service providers in terms of the outreach component and diversifying, as again was mentioned earlier in this presentation, both the number and the types of folks that do this outreach. We have a really unique program here. Started this gentleman and his team were kind of doing street outreach outside of our continuum of care, driven kind of through a religious drive to help the homeless, unsheltered homeless in this community. It's interesting. I'll take a little side note, but he comes from a family that runs a very popular and fancy Italian restaurant in town, and he would go out and meet with the unsheltered homeless with not just sandwiches and bananas, but very high-end steaks and lobster and really great food for these folks that came right from this restaurant. the purpose really in his mind, and it's true, is that he was really forging relationships and out of respect for these folks, and engaging them in terms of what their needs are, not to try to get them into shelter, but just to make sure that they're okay, build the trust, and then over time, the unsheltered folks would maybe listen to what he had to say in terms of, well, maybe you should call this social worker, or maybe you should visit this shelter. And so we've enveloped him, or Melissa has anyway, in our continuum of care into our street outreach network, and he's really kind of fortified this aspect of our strategy. It's also, if I could talk briefly about, resulted in a different type of shelter for the, typically the unsheltered homeless are shelter averse, and they don't want to go into a shelter where there are hundreds of beds, in kind of an open setting. And so one strategy is to create more non-traditional, smaller shelters. There are, smaller apartment buildings, 5 or 6 units that might be more conducive, or might, convince someone living on a bridge to move inside, especially during the winter months. So we have had examples of some of these non-traditional, smaller, what we might want to call transitional shelter, to bring some of these folks off the street and get them the help that they need. Ironically, these are tough to maintain because the state of New York has since required that all shelter beds be licensed, even emergency shelters that don't have much criteria in terms of sobriety or whatnot to get into, and that requirement is draining resources from being able to set up and maintain these more non-traditional shelter options for the shelter averse. And that's an issue that we're kind of working through. But that's really kind of an overview. It's like I said, the mayor has, embraced this constructive engagement, and it's really a function of our police office, our police department, and the continuum of care. And I echo everything that's been said here today. It's this network of relationships among the service providers, and then reaching out and establishing relationships among the unsheltered, that really is the most productive way of assisting these folks, making sure that they're okay, and being successful in bringing them in eventually to permanent housing. But I've said probably too much, and I probably should give the floor to Rich or Melissa.
Hi, I'm Rich Shopping with the Syracuse Police Department, and Paul's got a pretty good grasp on this, and he covered most of the bases. I can see why he's a commissioner. He knows quite a bit, stuff I didn't even think he was involved with. From the Syracuse Police standpoint, I mean, we usually get our complaints, it's complaint-driven. The complaints people are going to make about the homeless camp going to come in through City Hall, which get funneled over to the police department, or people call the police because of the homeless camps. So then it's kind of fallen on to me in the community policing division to take a look at these areas. They'll probably fall into one or two places. And I hope I'm not getting too simplistic. We got public and private property. So you have to, private property, sometimes you have to move a little faster, and you can be less forgiving when people are trespassing and whatnot. But on private property, we haven't had a situation in quite a while come to a head where we've had to do the what else. And the most important thing I've done, I've been doing this for 6 years now, got involved as my predecessor did with a homeless and housing coalition. And over there, which Melissa runs, I've made a lot of contacts, and I've met all the people that Paul's mentioned ahead of me, and there's a lot of other people over there. And so the whole thing is coordination, as far as I'm concerned, from the police end. That I'll go out and visit the camps in a non-confrontational manner. When I sometimes don't even have any intention of closing them down, I just know that they're there. And it's always revolves, and before we do anything, we're going to get people from the HHC and the outreach workers are going to come over there. We're going to offer services. We're going to work with people to the best of our ability. And so far, we've had a pretty good track record of doing this. And, this wasn't always done. Paul talks about prior experience. But part of this prior experience was egg on your face, because you go and you just toss people out. Not only are you not doing any good, but you're getting a lot of bad press out of it. And so it's to everybody's advantage. So we're not only the homeless people, but it's an advantage of the police department, it's an advantage of the municipality to work with people and to try to do things smoothly and to everybody's benefit. So that's kind of where I stand on that. So, and I actually enjoy getting out and talking to these people. I've met, believe it or not, I've met people I grew up with out there on the streets. I've met kids that have stayed in my house that were friends with my kids when they were little. So it's kind of on a personal level when you see these things. So I always, in my mind, it's a huge respect issue. You treat people with respect and try to do the right thing for them and the community at large.
Hi, I'm Melissa Marone. I'm with the Housing and Homeless Coalition and also the Continuum of Care lead for Syracuse, Onondaga, and Oswego counties. I wanted to thank Eric for coming to our community and really listening to our mayor and really hearing about what we're doing on a local level, and thank Paul and Lieutenant Shaw for their efforts as well. We do really have a productive continuum of care and coalition, and we meet monthly, and then we also have several committees that meet monthly. We have an outreach committee that meets monthly, which Lieutenant Shaw is a part of. And so in those meetings, we review a list of people who are outdoors. And that's probably around a dozen people, maybe less, depending on the climate at that time of year. And so we review HMIS, we go through it at a by name list. And we also have other attendees there who may not be on HMIS, so we use ID numbers just in terms of a practicality and into the weeds more. And so really talking about what each individual is going through and how do we best provide services for them. We're actively involved with the downtown committee, talking about panhandling and encampments, and really trying to provide alternatives to panhandling and encampments. So we have 2 outreach providers in My Father's Kitchen and the Rescue Mission, and they're going out daily, and they're really making relationships with people. The majority of what they're doing, because these people are so shelter averse, is we're utilizing Onondaga County Department of Social Services. They provide hotels and motels for people, and so they're going into the hotel and motel system, and then these individuals are being prioritized for housing. So oftentimes they're coming across our coordinated entry list, and we're moving them to the top of the list. There have been, in the past year, I think it was like 35 people who have been housed in the past year. And so, we're talking about it on kind of a, we don't really have, high number of people who are street homeless. I talk to other communities, and it's, in the thousands. So we're very fortunate here to have such a low number. I do want to say that no one is on the street in our community for, lack of shelter beds. So people are finding places to stay, and we're trying to figure it out with Department of Social Services and outreach providers. We've reduced homelessness over the past year just with DSS diversion, and people are mainly outdoors due to either it's mental health or substance abuse, or just, they don't want to go to a shelter, but mainly the by and large reason is substance abuse. So we started a trios model last year, and so we have Syracuse Behavioral Health Care KSAC worker, so someone who does, alcohol and substance abuse counseling, go out with outreach and a licensed nurse practitioner. And what they do is they go out and they meet people where they are, which, is outdoors. And so they're actively having conversations with people, trying to help them with their substance abuse disorder and, moving them into housing or into a hotel while they await housing. And so that model has worked for people with substance use disorders. We're still trying to perfect it on the mental health level, but, by and large, these are individuals who have substance use disorders who are outside. And I do want to state as well that in terms of encampments, what we've done is we've worked with storage companies to bring their belongings into a storage unit and really trying to avoid having everything kind of be taken away. So, you know, after they found housing, I should say. So what we do is, you know, Lieutenant Shaw goes out there with outreach workers from time to time, and they have conversations with these individuals who are outdoors. And once they find housing, you know, we'll find a place for their stuff, or, you know, it's in their own apartment. But if they can't, you know, have that stuff in their apartment, we find another alternative for it. So, you know, it might be something that's very near and dear to them, but maybe perhaps, you know, not allowed into their apartment. And so we're finding out alternatives for those belongings. And I do just want to echo what Eric said about the continuum of care, what was in the note, but we really took that seriously. And so we're having conversations with the downtown committee and city councilors who are looking to and have had conversations about doing a panhandling ban here. And, you know, we're really trying to make sure that that does not happen and trying to find alternatives to panhandling. So lots of conversations. And again, you know, it's just building those partnerships as well as building relationships with people who are outdoors.
Thank you so much, Paul, Richard, and Melissa. It's a really great case study, and again, just fantastic to see success in kind of real time in making progress towards actually ending homelessness in your community. So now we'll try once again. Sam, are you able to speak?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Excellent.
Okay.
So, go back to the start of your slides. There we go.
All right. Thank you for having me. My name is Sam Dodge, and I work in San Francisco in the mayor's office. And, you know, unlike Syracuse, we have about 10 times the amount of homelessness in our community, street homelessness. We have about 3,500, actually, people that are homeless, more than 10 times, 100 times. And so it's an ongoing crisis, and, you know, we have to respond to homeless encampments every day. And one of the things that happened that was very lucky to us is we had an opportunity to try to envision a new way to respond this past year. And today is actually the 1-year anniversary of what we end up calling the Navigation Center. This was something that was built off of New York City's safe havens, which are filled by their outreach teams, and that have a focus on low threshold and chronically homeless. And so let's go for the next slide for this. This is what the entrance looks like to this, our Navigation Center. And I'll say, so like was mentioned before, this was an idea to experiment, and we brought in a lot of experiments, and it's in a temporary structure that we are able to secure. The city has plans to build affordable housing on this site, but we have a very long development pipeline, so we were able to kind of secure it for until they're ready to develop. And we worked with this idea about that, you know, people had these barriers to come in, but once they come in, if we had a very warm and accepting program that was geared towards housing, that it would be very attractive, and that would really help the homeless outreach team when they're working with people living in encampments to be able to take us up on the offer. So people don't have to downsize their possessions to come in. We have storage on site for long-term storage, storage for short-term, and everyday access. We use shipping containers, which has been great. And then we work with people to kind of downsize while they're there voluntarily. You know, that they can bring in their dogs, and we've had dogs and cats and rabbits and snakes and birds and all kinds of different animals. But that's been really kind of a marginal effect. It's nice to have that, so there's not that obstacle for working with someone who has a pet. But the bigger advantage, we didn't have a place in our whole system for partners without children. And that was a lot of the reasons why people would reject shelter and be out on the streets, is that they had a loved one, they didn't want to be separated from each other, an opposite sex partner, and so that they could come in here together. And it's, you know, it's congregate setting, and there's 5 of these old classrooms that are dorms, and each one has 15 beds in them. We just allow people to push the beds together and to be able to snuggle and stuff. It's still in a group setting. We actually mix genders in those dorms, and that's worked out very well. One of the main differences that we were able to sell to people in the low threshold is that there is no curfew and there is no meal time. So people can access meals. The meal area is open 24 hours a day. So if people want to watch TV or read or play a video game or something, they can leave the dorm and go there. And the dorms are quiet all the time. So if you want to sleep during the day and you don't have other appointments, that's fine. And if you want to take a walk at night, that's no problem. You can come and go as you need. So the real resource that we were putting in there is to have mainstream benefits programs come and do like half days, a couple of days a week, to really help people get on the general assistance, to get linked to food stamps and medical coverage. And then also we worked out a deal with our DMV to have a weekly appointment so that we could work with people on getting their IDs. And the case management ratio is a lot better than at other places in our system, because basically what we were talking about is a systems approach to homelessness. And if you have, you know, priorities for housing, like say on, you know, chronicity or veterans or others, it's very helpful to have a place in the system that you can proactively reach out to that population, welcome them in, and work towards their housing. So, and we can also, you know, use a little bit of our locally funded supportive housing to be able to deal with some very complicated cases that, you know, for many reasons we want to work with them. So we can go to the next slide. So I talked about the high staffing. The capacity is also an important issue, because it's a you know, relatively small shelter. I mean, what we have is a hard time opening up new homeless service center sites in San Francisco, which I'm sure is like other communities, in that, you know, everyone wants to help the homeless somewhere else and not in their neighborhood. So it's very difficult to open a facility. And so what happens is our existing facilities get bigger and bigger. And so our main shelters for single adults are like 200 to 400 bed shelters. So this being a pop-up, it's just going to be temporary. So we kind of were able to open it up easier because people knew that we weren't going to be there forever. And we were able to open it as a smaller facility. And what's good about that is that we don't have uniformed security officers. And most of our other programs, we have security staff, contracted security staff, which is extremely expensive, and not having security staff sends a different message along with the other low threshold messages. It's like, you know, you're an adult, you are going to be changing your life radically. You're going to do all these appointments, you're going to, you know, get into housing, you're going to leave homelessness, and we're really here to support you on that journey. And so being low, you know, 80 people is not so small, but it's small enough that we don't need security, and we use that security line item and just rake it up under case aids, and so there's more people in the helping matrix of the site. And you know, because there's not a lot of ticky-tacky rules, the overall vibe of the place is very relaxed and quiet, and there's never lines anywhere because it's open 24 hours, and the food and everything is open 24 hours, and the showers and stuff. So it helps to really keep it relaxed. Let's say in the next slide. So, we use this in many different ways, and we just looked at how we could experiment with this, from just targeting a whole encampment and kind of inviting them all in, in groups of, 10 to 20 that would be in a certain encampment area or something, to targeting special needs populations, like pet owners or partners, or transgender community or youth, or targeting people that had tremendous amounts of possessions and really were unwilling to give that up. And what we've kind of seen is that generally the best, and also undocumented individuals that are long street homeless history and that need a really pretty intense caseworker to get them to a place where we can house them. And what we've seen is the best use is to have a consistent focus throughout the system, so that the navigation center doesn't have kind of special access to housing, but it has a kind of consistent focus that is consistent with how we're focusing all our housing options, no matter where you are. So this idea about the longest current episode of homelessness, and so whether you're in the shelter or under bridge or in the navigation center, you're all prioritized. But these are the different kinds of populations that we'd worked with. Let's say the next slide, I've got some outcomes. So we're tracking different kinds of exits, and we aren't the kind of system that can just capture people, right? So people can walk away. We can help people in many ways, but if they walk away, that's okay, and we invite them back in. I think the time to permanent housing is really good, 85 days. I think that's something that we've worked on, because we are taking the, it didn't take us very long to figure out that this best use of this was the most difficult cases. And so we're pretty proud of that. Let's go to the next. So here we have the different exits and the different negative exits. And one of the asked to leave is, it's largely around incidents of violence. We try to have a very open mind about substance use, that if people can use off-site and come back, and we monitor people if they're really very drunk or high. But if people use on site, we kind of use it as a chance to do an intervention. But violence is, something that we can't handle, and really have to ask people to leave. And we had continued working with people, or offer to continue working with people from case management from the street. One of the complications is adult couples without children, is that there was a lot of domestic abuse that we just had to learn how to deal with, and I think we've gotten a lot better with that. Can I go next? So it's a lot of partnerships. The reason why we were able to pump in all this kind of system change and other ways of thinking is because it was seeded with a donation from an anonymous donor. But we have to pull together a lot of different parts of the city to make this work, and a lot of our service community to make it work. And it's helped inspired us to think about broader system change and forming a department of homeless services. Our homeless outreach team has been newly resourced, and they're over double their previous size, and they're currently part of the Department of Public Health, and the shelters and most of the supportive housing is in our Human Services Agency. So we're going to marry those two with our prevention and diversion and rapid rehousing programs and have a single department that reports to the mayor. So it kind of came out of this effort around the Navigation Center. It's been very helpful. I'll say, two main things that came up recently is we had the Super Bowl, and we had where they were building a kind of entertainment free concert area was a place that has a high impact of night sleepers. It's not kind of the building encampments kind of folks, but we were able to invite in 30 people from that area that were long-term homeless that we were targeting, and of those 13 were housed, 9 are still there, 4 left on their own, and 3 were placed into higher levels of care. Also, I will say, following the kind of the events of the Super Bowl, there was a large encampment over a mile stretch under a freeway in San Francisco. And, what we ended up facing was, it was around 300 person encampment that grew very rapidly. And we tried to, we took about a month and a half, 2 months for the homeless outreach team, try to work with everyone, try to get that, use those best practices. We had to open up an emergency shelter. We brought some of these low threshold things where people could come in with partners, pets, and possessions and extended stay. We were able to place out 200 people into that emergency shelter and another 50 into our broader systems, including 14 into the Navigation Center before taking it down. And, when it did finally get taken down, there was no arrests and no citations. And so some of this thinking about how we're going to really target and work with people on the street to take down encampments is very helpful with reducing criminalization, and also maintaining, your obligations to the rest of the city at large about, not allowing massive encampments that are health hazards and security and safety hazards and others. So, as we inch towards a system that's going to end homelessness for everyone, when someday the federal government funds the kind of housing that would be necessary, we need to experiment with these kinds of interventions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was fantastic. So recognizing that we are running over time, I'm going to do a couple closing polls, and then we'll do some questions and answers. We've got a couple questions in the queue. So we will watch this question. So did today's webinar improve your knowledge of how to address encampments? All right, excellent. Looks like the vast majority of people learned at least something. So, and many people learned a lot, so that's great. And most importantly, will you use what you learned today in addressing homelessness in your community? Excellent. So the vast majority, again, are going to be able to use these tools in their work in their community. So I'm putting up contact information for myself and for Tristia on the screen. I'm sure if there are questions specifically for other panelists, we can put you in contact. The questions we've gotten so far through the question bar, I'll address now. And again, if anybody has any additional questions, you can type them into the questions box on the side of your screen. So the first question we had is, what is your definition of an encampment? For the purposes of our report, we excluded encampments that were specifically came out of the Occupy movement, because we saw those as kind of a separate thing unto themselves. But otherwise, our media survey just looked for the word encampment or tent city, whether that was 5 people or 50 or 200, 300, as Sam was just saying. It really varied. As long as it was more than just one tent, I think it counted as an encampment. I don't know if anybody else has any other responses to, there's no specific resources that come from the federal level, certainly for encampments per se. So, addressing, it's any gathering of homeless individuals, you're concerned about the individuals within the encampment, not defining the encampments in any specific way. I don't know if anybody else has anything they would want to say about that. All right. Next question is, can we get a copy of this presentation? And yes, as I said at the beginning, we will be posting a recording of the presentation online, and we will get the PowerPoint slides up as well. We will send out those links if you registered for the webinar. You'll get those links in a day or two as soon as we're able to get them up online. Next question, Tristia, if you're still there, is can a DOT property, Department of Transportation property, be considered as part of the McKinney-Vento Act?
Yes, that is provided that it meets the criteria of being either underutilized, unutilized. Well, actually, let me clarify. If it's not a federal property and it's not owned by a federal agency, then no, it does not qualify for transfer under McKinney-Vento. So there may be in your state a similar law that allows for transfer of a state Department of Transportation property. Assuming it is a federal property and it's unutilized, underutilized, surplus, or excess, and it's available for transfer, then yes, absolutely. And there are thousands upon thousands of properties that are made available each year that could be used by your communities for services and housing.
Excellent, thank you. And then the last question we have is, how long can a family remain in homeless status for the purpose of school enrollment, since we have many families doubling or tripling up for years? And so this is definitely another area that the Law Center does a lot of work on, is access to education for homeless children and youth. Homelessness under the federal education definition has no explicit time limit. As long as the family remains in a situation where they lack fixed, adequate nighttime and regular nighttime residence, then presumably they continue to meet that definition. If it remains over the course of several years, it may begin to look more fixed. But if it's still not adequate because it's overcrowded, then that family may remain McKinney-Vento eligible for a longer time period. However, if it's for purposes of staying in the school of origin, and it looks like the family may be there for a longer time, schools are, welcome to have a conversation with the family about, if they're going to be there, then they might want to consider transferring to the school of, local, that they would be locally zoned to, just because that would provide a more stable way for the youth to get to school. Maybe doing it, on a basis in between school years, or in between transitioning from a, elementary school to middle school, or middle school to high school, making it an easier transition for the youth would be a good way to approach it. But theoretically, under the federal definition, there is no explicit time limit. And so as long as the situation remains not fixed, regular, and adequate, or any one of those, they could remain within the definition, and school districts would be required to continue serving them. And again, that's another big reason that it's necessary, as Sam said, to push for more federal resources and to push for more local resources to address the lack of adequate affordable housing overall in our communities. Because in addition to criminalization of homelessness costing our communities lots of money, they could be better spent elsewhere. Homeless families who are receiving transportation from their school districts to get back to their school of origin, because there aren't any local resources within their districts, that's money that again might be better spent by addressing the lack of adequate affordable housing within the school district. So we've gotten one more question. Is the Federal Register the only place surplus federal properties are listed? Tricia, do you want to answer that?
Yes, I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Is the Federal Register the only place surplus federal properties are listed?
It is not technically the only place that the surplus federal properties are listed. However, it is the easiest method for finding real-time updates of properties that are available. There are a number of ways that you can access the HUD notice that's published in the Federal Register. Each Friday, you can gain access to those properties that are made available and that will be held for a 60-day period from the date of publication, so that you can have an opportunity to submit an expression of interest in the property. The law firm is developing a toolkit that is in draft form now, but if there's anyone that is eligible to apply for these properties and is interested in access to that toolkit, please send me an email and I'll send it to you right away.
Great. So we've gone very long, but most of the people stuck with us. So thank you for that. If there are any further questions, type them into your chat boxes now. And if not, then I'll just take this time to thank all of our presenters for sharing the information that they shared today, to encourage people to take advantage of the resources from the federal level, especially the guidance on ending homeless encampments from the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. The U.S. Interagency Council also has regional coordinators who can help to work to bring best practices from other places to connect local governments with peer providers, peer folks in different communities where they've had success. Again, the city of Syracuse, I'm sure, is willing to talk to other communities about their success, as well as Sam and the work that they're doing in San Francisco. So definitely take advantage of those resources that are out there. As I said, this webinar will be hopefully recorded. Hopefully it's been recorded and will be up on YouTube in a couple of days as soon as we're able to process it. And the slides will be available and links sent out to everybody afterwards. So seeing no further questions, unless anybody has any closing thoughts, we can wrap up. Tricia?
I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and let the audience know that we conduct webinars regularly, and please be on the lookout for future information about criminalization and constructive alternatives.
Great. Sam or Paul, any last thoughts from you?
Just happy, like you said, Eric, we're happy to respond to any questions subsequent to this, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this conversation. It's great.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. And as Tricia said, we do provide these webinars frequently. Please feel free to join our mailing list to get notified of them. And feel free to make a donation to the Law Center to help support this work so that we can bring more of these learning opportunities to people in their communities. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.